right, welcome everybody. This is Clayton Vance, Timeless Homes Podcast. I just got back from a trip from Uzbekistan, and I want to talk about that. So today we're going to do a little. I'm not a travel blogger or travel vlogger by any stretch of the imagination, but man, this was a fascinating trip. And so if anyone out there is thinking about going to Uzbekistan, give you my 5-minute rundown of what to do, what not to do, and what to eat, what not to eat. And then we'll get into the kind of my little architectural exploration based on all of the principles that we teach here at Timeless Homes. So Uzbekistan, it's the country you've never heard of, the country you've never thought about, the country everyone forgot about. It's like the middle child that is sitting right in between all these really nasty siblings that are just fighting with each other. I mean, literally, this country, it's about the size of California with about the same population as California. And it sits right south of Kazakhstan, which is right south of Russia. And it's right east or west of China. And it also borders Afghanistan on its kind of southeast end. And then the Caspian Sea over there, and Turkmenistan, all these other stands right around there, right? And so it's right in the middle of Russia, Afghanistan, and China. And yet, honestly, when I was there, I had never felt more safe in any other country I'd ever traveled to than I did in this place. It was perfectly safe. It was quite remarkable. So why on earth Uzbekistan? That's what everyone asks. Why did you go to Uzbekistan? Well, we have some crazy neighbors across the street from us who like to travel with my wife and I, and they persuaded us to go, and they said it's going to be just really awesome. You need to go there. This is the time to go before all the tourists go, and so it's just a really authentic, rich, culturally rich place that will have a real authentic experience, right? And so it's not going to be all touristed out yet. And they were right. I honestly tried to get out of this trip about 3 or 4 times, but they kept persuading us, no, you have to go, you have to go. Uzbekistan literally is, if I were to dig a hole through in my backyard and I were to keep digging and digging and digging and digging, I would get to Uzbekistan. That's where it is. The time difference was 11 hours, and it is foreign. My gosh, it is foreign. There isn't hardly any English anywhere. No signs are in English. It's all either Arabic, Uzbek, which I believe is some dialect of Turkish, and Russian. So if you speak one of those languages, you're going to be A-OK. If you are English, it's going to be a little rough because there are not very many people who speak English there, and there are no signs hardly at all in English. They are trying to as they left the USSR, however many years ago that was, 20 something or other years ago, early 90s. They decided to go secular and make friends and peace with the West and become more capitalist. And with that, they tried to let go of they tried to adopt an alphabet to the language that the Westerners could read, and so it's slowly becoming more, I guess, Westernized, so that people like you and me can go over there and not be completely lost. But I'll tell you what, I mean, there are not a lot of tourists, and those tourists who are there, most of them aren't speaking English. There was, one other time in the 10 days I was there that I heard like North American English. I heard British English a couple times, but other than that, nope. So, once again, Uzbekistan. Why Uzbekistan? The Silk Road is really what it boils down to. The Silk Road, 1,500 years ago-ish, that traveled honestly right through some major cities in Uzbekistan, and during the 1400s, Samarkand, which is one of the main cities in Uzbekistan, it was the capital of that whole Persian Empire when Emir Timur another incredibly important historical figure you've never heard of before, conquered the Ottoman Empire and the Persian Empire and stuff, and that's where he ruled, and that's where his capital was. And I'm telling you what, if you go here, and if you've been to Rome, and then you see some of the ruins of these old Islamic like portal gateways and stuff, it puts the Romans to shame. I remember sitting there in the baths of Caracalla just looking at in Rome, thinking about how massive these ancient Roman baths were, made of brick. And then I went to this place, like, you want to get blown away? Wow. These things are amazingly huge. So, some practicalities if you plan to go there. And I would recommend going there, but I'd only recommend going, unless you're incredibly adventurous, go on a tour group. We went with Gate 1, and they did a pretty good job. But boy, I would definitely go on a tour group so you have a tour guide who's helping you out and telling you what to do, what not to do, because it's a matter of what to eat and what not to eat, and they pamper you pretty well, because our stomachs honestly aren't adapted for what they've got over there. And I got sick, and it took me about a week and a half to get over it when I got home, and it was totally unpleasant, and I still deal with it like 3 weeks later now. I'd never been to a country where you can't just eat everything, and so be careful when you go there about the food. The food is delicious. I think I got something from eating horse meat, which I honestly accidentally ate. We went to this place to eat this stuff they call plov, P-L-O-V, I think, but it's a pilaf type of thing. It's a rice with some meat and water chestnuts and whatever else they put in it. And the meat they typically use is a lamb. So if you like lamb, go for it. If you don't like lamb, oh my gosh, you can find plenty of other meat to eat, but just keep asking for the other meat, because lamb is really, man, that is something. I am not a fan. I didn't know I wasn't a fan until I went to Uzbekistan, and now I know I'm not a fan. So, don't eat the horse meat. I unwittingly, unknowingly, accidentally did that. There was a big old buffet, and there was a whole bunch of little meats and a bunch of cheeses and just a bunch of vegetables. I'm like, I'm just going to try one of everything. Stupid idea. Very stupid idea. It didn't taste bad, but I think that's what got me sick. And the water, apparently you're not supposed to drink the water, so bring if you go with the tour group, they'll provide you plenty of bottled water, so you don't have to bring your own filtered water. If you're really adventurous, you go on your own, then bring a filtered bottle of filtered bottle so that you can filter your own water. But you'll be fine if you go on a tour group. So the money, man, the dollar goes a long way over there. I remember we went out to eat one time for 4 of us. The total tab was $15 is all. And so anyway, everything is pretty cheap. In terms of straight up safety, if that's kind of a big concern you have, it's safe. It's perfectly safe. I don't know why it's so safe, but it is really, really safe. There isn't really a lot of theft. There isn't a lot of drinking, smoking, or drugs and theft. And so when you eliminate all those things, then it's a really safe environment. And honestly, I felt like I was like in a throwback to the 50s or something, because in these, man, I don't even know how to say this. I guess traditional cultures, Islamic cultures or whatever, the male-female roles are still pretty well, defined. Like if you were to go back to the 50s, and there's a real healthy respect from the children to their elders. And I would sit there and just observe people when we had free time. And honestly, it was quite remarkable, because I was just watching a people who seemed like incredibly content and just pleasantly happy. And I'd watch there's no ramps anywhere, no ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act type of stuff, ADA compliant ramps anywhere. And so it's always stairs everywhere. So you get these old people with canes walking down, and then they get to a stairway and can't do anything. And it's not just a couple minutes before some group of teenagers helps this old person up or down a stairway, or, you know, little kids helping their littler siblings up and down. And it was really, really nice to be in an environment where you just watched this kind of social dignity happen on a civic level, just over and over and over and over again. It was quite remarkable. And I don't know if I just lucked out and just watched some, you know, rare occurrence, or if this just happened all the time. But what I saw is it happened all the time, and it's just part of their culture. And so that's why it just feels pretty safe. In terms of, you know, some other things you Westerners would have to get used to, toilet facilities. First time I ever had to go to the bathroom in a hole in the ground. Sometimes some of the probably the nicest bathroom I've ever been in my life was in Uzbekistan, and the worst I've ever been in was Uzbekistan, and I don't know why, but it's just have money with you, because you got to pay to go. And if you need to wipe, it is weird because you can't flush the toilet paper. Never done that before, where you just put it in a little trash bin right next to you. Yeah, that's right. I got people giving me strange looks like, "Oh my gosh, that's disgusting." And yeah, it's really, really weird for us. But and it's not like toilet paper. It's like, I don't know, it's like craft paper or something. It's like it's just terrible. But you do what you got to do in order to get the cultural experience. So yeah, you won't be wiping your nose and your face with the facial tissues anyone provides, because it's like sandpaper. And then in terms of like hotels and stuff, this is why I'm saying go with a tour group, because they'll try to put you up in the nicest hotels. And those nicest hotels, I'm telling you, if you're a Simmons Beauty Rest mattress salesman, go to Uzbekistan and you'll make a killing. Say, hey, Westerners like these types of mattresses, because what we slept on the whole time while we were over there was like a piece of plywood with not even a foam topper, but some cotton swabs on it. I mean, it was, whoa, it hurt. You woke up and like in the morning, it felt like you got beat up by someone all night long. So uncomfortable. If you like really, really stiff beds, what I would do to practice is go sleep on a piece of plywood and see if you like that with like a blanket on it. And that's how stiff their beds are. If you need something a little more than that, just be prepared. You'll probably survive, but holy cow, just be prepared for some really stiff beds. But yeah, that would be what it's like. Go put a 4x8 piece of plywood on your bed, put like 2 blankets on it, and then sleep on that and see how you feel in the morning, because that's what it's like. And I'm talking like the nicest hotels. We were in some pretty decent hotels, and sometimes it was really funny because each time we went to a new place, 4 different cities we stayed in the hotel, you either got a decent bed where the mattress was okay, or a decent breakfast, or the water pressure in a decent shower with decent soap, or it was just clean. You never got all 4 of them. You got maybe 2 of the 4. And so it's like your expectations have to be pretty low. And then the roads over there are just atrocious. It's weird because the government, rather than going communist after the USSR, went sort of capitalist. They maintained the social they maintain government control over all the natural resources like oil and stuff. And so there's still and gold. Apparently they have oil and gold, or natural gas and gold, and so they have a lot of wealth that way, government-wise, and they are doing a ton of building. When we were over there, man, it seemed like everyone was working all the time. Tons of construction. But the irony with all of it is it's their version of American suburbia. It's just the weirdest thing to see that no matter where you go on the planet, the mentality, when you lose the ability, the knowledge, and the culture of building traditional towns and cities, and traditional architecture, wow, you end up with some really, really sketchy stuff. Honestly, I felt like I was looking at 1980s and 1990s postmodernism in most of the. It honestly looks like you're driving through Las Vegas. Some of the 1990s Las Vegas, but the old historic stuff, that's what you go for, and that's worth it. So let's dive into. Are there any other questions? Any other questions I should answer about like what you would want to know before you go to Uzbekistan? Help me out, Trevor. If you're going over there, camera's a good idea, but nothing huge. I don't know, like Ubers and taxis. Well, I never took one of those, so I don't even know.
You talked about getting around in a tour bus or whatever.
Yeah, tour buses are definitely the way to go. It was really kind of funny because the tour bus, we went on some pretty rural roads, and the roads were terrible, and we'd pass these kids on the street, and they'd just stare. It was so funny. Like every kid in these rural places that we'd pass on the street would just wave to the tour bus. We'd wave back, and it would just make their day. It's like they'd never seen one of these things before, just driving through the middle of nowhere where most of them are still doing horse and buggy and, a few cars. It's like apparently Chevy has a stranglehold of the car industry over there, so every single car is a white Chevy. It's hilarious. So architecturally, from my standpoint, I regrettably didn't do the type of research I needed to do before I went over to really get the full richness out of it. But I was blown away because this is my first experience in an Islamic country with Islamic architecture, and it is beautiful. And one of the premises that we begin this whole series with is that no matter where you are on the planet, all traditional architecture has these things in common, which can help objectively identify or qualify what is beautiful. And those things we talk about are order, proper use of materials, hierarchy, proportion, details at different levels of scale, and that type of stuff. But primarily that order and hierarchy is something that I think we need to look at in just this little blog or podcast today. I've got some photos up on my screen, so if you're following this on YouTube or the website or whatever, that would be probably a little more helpful. If not, I'll try to explain what we're looking at again, as always, and hopefully it makes sense. So the building we're looking at right now on the screen is a little man, just because I don't know Islamic architecture all that well, I don't know if it's a mosque or if it's just a museum or what it is. I'm not entirely sure what it is. But it houses the oldest Quran that's written on deerskin. And this Quran is like 6 feet wide. The pages are like 2 feet by 3 feet, and it's deerskin, and it's in calligraphy, right? So ink, and it's just a beautiful work of art. But the building itself, if you look at what I'm looking at, it's weird because they don't have a lot of columns. They don't have the same sort of column systems with lintels that the Greco-Roman architecture has. It's very mural, and so it's like they have this wall that they then decorate the wall with all their geometric tiles and geometric forms. And so if we were to look at these principles, where's the opening? It's pretty dang obvious. And so you have these 3 arches that are more or less the same size, but that centerpiece, that center portal area, that center entrance is slightly taller than the 2 flanking entrances, which gives it that sense of hierarchy and that sense of order. And if you were to actually go through and look at the proportions, I think you would find how everything relates to each other, because proportion has to do with the language of geometry, right? And so, what is geometry? It's almost like math being realized in physical space. So number being realized in physical space. And so if math is kind of the eternal language of science, of design of everything, and it's just universal, and geometry is that aspect of math which is the language of design. And in pretty much every traditional culture, geometry has been very symbolic. And I want to get into that in this podcast because I just want to ask some questions to the audience and to everyone else, because I have some questions that I would love someone out there to answer for me, because I can't come up with a definitive answer. And I would like a definitive answer. I know what I think, but it would be interesting if people out there contributed. So what would often happen in these Islamic scenarios is you'd have squares and circles with these domes. And so squares typically in most cultures represent the earth, and circles represent the eternities or the heavens. And so in the most sacred places within these, there would be domes representing the heavens or the infinite nature of God, right? And you'd be going through these portals that define sacred space from non-sacred space. And that seemed to be just the pattern. And it is interesting because the similarity of all of these different mosques, madrasas, which are schools, all these things, you look at them and you're like, oh, they're all the same. But then when you look at all the details, they're totally different. And it's the same with Greco-Roman temples and Gothic churches and that type of stuff. You look at them, anyone who's been to Europe, like when I travel with my wife over there, and she's like, I've just seen too many churches. You go over there to see the church because it's beautiful, but eventually they all begin to look exactly the same. But it's those details that make them very unique, and it's the tiling of all of these different places is in all of this Islamic architecture that make it very unique, and each one different from each other, even though the overall form is more or less the same. And I just pulled up a picture of a mihrab, which is the niche, the prayer niche that faces or will help you, or it faces you, but I think you face Mecca as you face this mihrab. And if we were to look at this particular one, this is in a mausoleum in Samarkand. That to me looks an awful lot like, if you get the center line, man, so close. It looks very, very close to that gold section. But look at that tile work. Honestly, some of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in my life were here. Because some of the things they did in very delicate colors, the color schemes between the tan and the blues that they used, absolutely stunning. But the tiling patterns that they had were just exquisite, unbelievably exquisite. An interesting thing about we talk about materials. Oh, I just pulled up another picture of some of the modern interpretations of the historic stuff. All of their columns. Take a look at this. All of their columns followed this very similar pattern, where you'd have this ball down here, and then this thing would wrap over it and come up to the top, and then you'd have these scrolled brackets that would hold up all of your lintels and cornices and that type of stuff. And so, in a way, they had capitals sometimes not, but they had these bracketing things. Which the other place I've seen those is in the USA, is in the Southwest, where the Spanish influence was, which I believe is from the Moorish influence, which I believe is from this Islamic influence. And so this bracketing thing, it's interesting how architecture travels the planet. And this is why I really don't believe in contextualism. I believe the wonderful, exchange of beauty. And if you have if you like something and think something's beautiful, I have no objection to building something you believe is absolutely beautiful, regardless of. I mean, I wish I could do a pergola that had these columns on it. These are absolutely amazing. The details, the carvings, amazing. But so take a look at that column, and now let's look at the modern interpretation in the airport. It's like, holy cow! It's the same problem we have all over the planet. Both of these things that we're looking at were built recently. Like this mosque, I don't know how old this mosque is that I'm pulling up, but they have to keep rebuilding their mosques because they don't use adobe bricks. They use a fired brick, but they are not totally fired, I don't think, because they fall apart pretty easy. So they have to keep redoing all their stuff. Just reworking and remodeling over and over and over again every year, because the materials they use fall apart, so they just disintegrate, which has to do with our material philosophy that we have here. It's like the closer it is to nature, the better it will wear over time, and I think that is generally true. But it's like, okay, guys, come on, you might want to fire these a little bit more, but then I think it turns more red and then screws up your color scheme, because the color scheme here is really, really nice. So the interesting thing is, on the real, trying to do a modern interpretation of things, you lose the texture, and you lose the character, and that's why it's always just, it's not going to be as timeless when you look at those things. So, and this is that portal that goes into the courtyard, into this courtyard, and that defines those two different spaces. And this is inside another courtyard of a madrasa, which were typically 2 stories, and the classrooms, I believe, would be on the bottom, and the living quarters were on the top. Some of these madrasas are still actually used, and others are just used as tourist shops, and they're absolutely beautiful. You can look at that tile work; it's amazing, and to get up close and to see how they did it, it's worth going to Uzbekistan to see these things. And another fascinating thing is, in some of their old palaces, oftentimes in classical architecture, Greco-Roman classical architecture, most of the time you would have an open space in the middle. The center of your rhythm, or your bays of all of your columns, you'd typically have an even number. Am I saying that right? So that your center is always a void, whereas these entry niches, these, what did they call them? I can't remember. It's where the person in the house would host their guests. It's their porch. It's their front porch, which is inside their courtyard, but it's their front porch, and it would be occupied by a column in the center, and there would be a door behind it, windows behind it, and it was the oddest condition coming from the perspective that I came from, but it still had a very specific order, rhythm, hierarchy, balance, and all of those principles, details at different levels of scale. And it worked really, really well, and it was absolutely beautiful. And so the ability to have an occupied center with a column, that's one of those things which is a rule that can be broken and still be incredibly successful, as shown in this picture. This is that entrance portal to this this space in one of those domes. It's actually behind this big giant portal, but just look at those geometries. So let's talk about these geometries a little bit. If geometry is the language of creation, as it were, this is where I want a discussion. Then and geometry has always had symbolic meaning in cultures. And so like the square would represent the earth, and the circle would represent the heavens. The arrangement of these things would represent, different things culturally, historically. We now live in a completely secular world where we have more or less eliminated symbolism from our lives, in religious life, in society, in all of our culture. I mean, think about it. When's the last time you even thought about symbolic geometry? You never have. You never even thought about it. But when you look at these things, it really is like, holy cow, that's beautiful. That is absolutely beautiful. And it's the geometry which makes it beautiful. And not only is it the geometry, but it's the sacred nature of what that geometry means and the intention of the design of the geometry, which gives it the variety. Because what will happen is if you just do some computer-generated, here's a geometry and here's a pattern, without putting any sort of meaning behind it, you just end up with a very stale pattern. It may be a pattern, but it's still just a meaningless pattern, and which doesn't have the same sort of richness that if you were to start from a point of meaning, that would give you a richer result, which is what this does. And I guess this is a cause for like historic and traditional religions. This is a possible, not necessarily a promotion or sales pitch, but it's like, what did they have right that could help us today become better people? Because in a world where we've thrown away religion in so many cases, what else have we thrown away with that? And can you actually have really beautiful things? Can you have beautiful architecture without that symbolic meaning, or without real good geometry? Is it even possible? I don't know. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. But it's an interesting question to think about. Because in terms of, from an evolutionary perspective, the apes are our closest relatives, right? I want to bring something up on the board, which is a funny little comparison. Right now, I've put up the Vitruvian Man, which is an exploration of the human form as it relates to the overall geometric extents of our limbs. And it was written in the book that Vitruvius wrote, the 10 Books of Architecture that was discovered. And he wrote, 1st century BC or 1st century AD? I can't remember. I have to pull it out. And he talked about how if we were to spread our arms out to their full extent, it would match our height. And if we were to raise those up to the crown of our head and spread our feet out, we'd be at the center point. It would be within a circle. And so if you can see this image, everyone knows what this image is. And this was drawn by Leonardo da Vinci, and that's why it's called the Vitruvian Man, is because Vitruvius, the architect in ancient Rome, was the one that wrote this down. So here's my question that I really, really, really would like someone to answer. And this is like one reason why I guess for me, I believe there is a creator, why there is some organizational being out there who organized this whole thing for us. Because from an evolutionary standpoint, I'm still trying to get a solid answer as to why mankind can fit in a square and a circle. And let's look at this a little bit further. If you take the center point of this square, let's take the center point of this square, which is right here. And, well, I didn't quite get it right, but it's close enough for our purposes. Here's what's interesting is that center point in the square. In the square, what does that square represent? It represents the earth and the telestial sphere, as it were. It represents things that are natural. The four winds, the four rivers, the four great, all these things. And that line, that center point, actually goes right through the general region, right? It goes right through the area that signifies kind of the so-called carnal nature of man, that sexual drive. And what's interesting is when you do the extents of the circle, that center point goes up to the navel. And so if the circle represents the eternal nature of mankind, and that navel point is where life is generated. The navel is, we have a belly button because that's where we were given life, right? From our mothers. And that, it's just really, really interesting that actually becomes the compass center point of the circle when you extend out the hands and the feet all the way to the edges. And so when you compare it to our ancestors, our closest relatives, this is a gorilla. I think it'd be the same with chimpanzees and other things. Look at the different proportions in terms of legs, arms, body, and that type of stuff. Gorillas and things, they don't fit within this. What is in terms of an evolutionary standpoint, man, it just seems to me that the ape people are, the ape folks, they have great advantages on us in terms of just their physical capabilities and leverage, strength. They can live outside, we can't live outside, and they don't fit within these same geometries, but mankind does. But I don't know. Here's the question: is what is the evolutionary reason that if there is not someone up there saying this is how I'm going to design it, and here's symbolism, and here's the language of geometry, here's the language of design. If there's not someone like directing the design of this, how on earth and why on earth did evolution finish our limbs at those points and put those two things at the center points of those two shapes? Anybody out there? I want to know from a scientific evolutionary standpoint why that happened. Because I can't think of any reason why not. And that is why I strongly believe that there is some a being who made all this happen. And that's why sacred geometry has objective beauty when it comes to architectural design, that's trying to make that symbolic representation of the heavens and the earth and the relationship with our eternal nature as human beings. So anyway, I had not seen this type of kind of explicit geometry in architecture more clear than I did in this Islamic architecture in Uzbekistan. And that's why I wanted to have this random discussion with everyone today. Was this architecture, more than any other architecture I've seen, was all about the geometric patterns that had some sort of meaning. The script around the frieze, that wrapping frieze that goes around, it's scripture from the Quran, and in Arabic or one of their scripts, and I don't know what it says because I can't read it, but all of it has very specific meaning. And I wish my guide knew what that meaning was, but he didn't. And so it would be up to me to actually go research this. I would love to be able to sit down with someone who understands Islamic architecture and the symbolism behind it, and just let's have a discussion, because it is cool and it is beautiful and absolutely timeless. Absolutely. So, if you're going to Uzbekistan, remember what I said? Go on a tour group and practice sleeping on plywood. And I would do a little research before you get there, so you understand a little bit about what you're going to be. But you can't pronounce anything. I mean, it's so hard. The language is so different. But it's a wonderful trip. And if you go, you're going to enjoy it because the people were so wonderful. And would I go back? It's a long flight, and I've got a lot of other places to see. But if you're looking for one more really random place to go that is off the beaten path, that you don't run into tourists every time you turn around, this is the place to go. So this is Clayton Vance with Timeless Homes. Answer my question if you can, and I'll see you next time.